Scarlet and Violet did not start Pokemon's decline. They exposed the design problem the series had been building on for generations. You can patch out the framework, fill in all the empty areas, and fix any technical bug that people had to point at, and I would still have the same complaint. Too much modern Pokemon is built around delivering you the content instead of making the journey itself worth understanding. Our routes became thinner, uncertainty became something to remove, and the NPCs and UI took over the work that the world building used to do. By the time Pokemon went properly open world, the series had spent years training itself to keep the player on such a short informational leash. So I want to trace this decline backwards, because the interesting question isn't what did Scarlet and Violet break, it's what changed long before them that made this version inevitable. Modern games have enormous quality of life improvements. Competitive training is less absurd, move pools are way easier to understand, and team building has become so much more flexible. We have better access to information that the older games hid behind guesswork and external guides only found in Nintendo Power. Some modern Pokemon designs are phenomenal. Legends of Arceus prove the series can still surprise you when it's willing to rethink the loop. When I say that it declined, I mean the decline in player trust in adventure texture. The sense that the game gives you a world, loosens that leash, and lets your own mistakes and discoveries become part of the story. And this is where Pokemon has been eroding. For me, the first major philosophical change becomes obvious around Sun and Moon. Alola is beautiful, distinct, and full of personality. The game pacing is consistently interrupted by the characters and the guidance. You're rarely allowed to exist in the world for long before the game reminds you there's a correct next activity. There's just too many cutscenes. And plenty of games I love have mountains of dialogue. The problem is that the dialogue often functions as a navigational control. It keeps you moving through the approved sequence. Older Pokemon could also be linear. Kanto's no Elden Ring. Johto does not have to give you a hand glider to ask you to invent your own region. But those regions often disguise their linearity inside the geography. You followed roads, noticed caves, double-backed, found out the shortcuts, and remember what doors were locked, and you occasionally got completely turned around. The game's structure was linear, but your experience of moving through it had some room to breathe. Then, we go to Sword and Shield, and this is where the physical world started reflecting the same philosophy. Again, these are things I like. The wild area was huge. It signaled that Pokemon wanted to experience with scale and visible creatures. Raids gave groups something to do together. Galar had a strong visual theme, but many traditional routes felt compressed into direct conduits between towns. This matters because the routes used to do more than just connect the gyms. And a good route created its identity throughout the layout. Trainers, optional items, caves, the weather, the grass placement side paths, and the possibility that you might find something you could not yet reach. It's a small puzzle made out of geography. When the route became a short pipeline, the game no longer asked you to navigate. It just asks you to proceed. And that sounds like a small difference, but it's enormous in practice. The navigation created memories. You could memorize the way to go through the darkest cave without having to activate your flash. Then, Scarlet and Violet made the iconic move. Pokemon finally becomes substantially more open, but the design underneath it still does not fully trust its players. You can choose where to go, but the leveling didn't scale smoothly to support the fantasy that you were choosing in your own order. The map is filled with explicit objectives. The game gives you multiple quest lines, but each destination is clearly stamped and cataloged. There's freedom in direction, but not in the discovery of the world itself. And that is why I think the technical discussion, while deserved, sometimes hides the deeper issue. Scarlet and Violet did not simply launch rough. They inherited years of Pokemon becoming less interested in making the player read the environment, test your boundaries, fail, backtrack, and have to remember. The map got bigger, while the navigational problems simply got smaller. Here's where it gets complicated. Players can ask for convenience. I asked for quality of life. You probably did at some point too. Nobody wants to waste 20 minutes doing something that feels pointless. The problem is that friction and inconvenience are not identical. Grinding against a terrible menu is inconvenience. Walking through a cave where you have to make the right choice is friction. Repeating a 30-second animation hundreds of times is an inconvenience. Losing a battle because you brought the wrong team is friction. Having no clue what stats does because the game refuses to explain it is an inconvenience. But having good enough information to make a decision and then choosing badly is friction. Good games remove inconvenience while preserving that meaningful friction. Pokemon has increasingly removed both. And once you understand that distinction, a lot of the modern game designs suddenly make sense. Permanent XP share reduce the tendency to level, which is good, but can also flatten the consequences of team rotation. Constant objective markers prevent aimless wandering, which again, convenient, but can make the landmarks feel meaningless. Frequent healing reduces backtracking, but makes a route feel much less dangerous. Every one of these decisions solves a real problem. The cumulative effect creates a new one. If I were drawing the timeline, I would not put a giant red X over a single generation. X and Y already showed the series getting more generous with experience and more interested in keeping the player moving. Sun and Moon turned the guidance and interruptions into a much bigger thing in the moment. Sword and Shield then put a lot of the campaign onto routes, but those routes felt extremely controlled, even in the wild area. So it was proving that Pokemon could still be curious with creativity. Scarlet and Violet finally gave us a legitimate open world, but it still carried forward the instinct to make objectives highly visible and to protect the player from too much uncertainty. Different games, different problems, same direction. More convenience, more explicit guidance, less resistance to players moving forward. And that matters because people often argue about the newest technical disaster as it performs in the entire story. Scarlet and Violet can run poorly and still contain ideas that you like. Sword and Shield can have a quarter-heavy campaign and still give me the wild area. Sun and Moon can interrupt me with too many things and still have totem battles and regional forms. The decline I'm talking about is not a score going from 9 to 8 to 7. It's a design philosophy that's slowly changing what the player is responsible for. Scarlet and Violet's interesting because on paper, it solves complaints. You want freedom? Fine. Here's a huge region with multiple major quest lines. Go have fun. But freedom's not only the number of directions I can walk, it's whether the world asks you to actually read it, whether the challenges read coherently to an order that you choose, and whether getting somewhere early creates a meaningful problem. An open map without a system that supports sequence breaking can become a collection of disasters instead of an adventure. You're free to arrive out of order, but the game does not always know what to do with the freedom. This is not the same problem as the cutscene density, but it grows from the same reluctance to let uncertainty become a meaningful part of play. The strongest defense of modern Pokemon is that the games respect your time better. And yes, they often do that. Faster travel, easier team leveling, clearer objectives, and better access to movement, less grinding, fewer obstacles blocking the roads, or improvements for a lot of players. I don't want to throw those away because nostalgia told me to suffer building my character. The question is not what replaced the friction, it's if the answer is more interesting. If the answer is simply that the game now removes a decision, a memory, or a piece of navigation, then the convenience has a cost. My argument's not make Pokemon annoying again, it's stop assuming every moment of resistance was an accident. That's why I would never try to prove decline by comparing review scores and counting features. The useful question is what the player is responsible for in each generation. Do I need to remember directions, manage anything, build a team for a specific problem, notice different clues, decide when I'm ready? If those responsibilities keep moving from the player to the interface, the experience gets more passive even if the game becomes bigger. Scarlet and Violet did not invent that trend. It inherited it. That's why fixing performance alone would not fix the things I'm talking about. So no, Pokemon's decline did not start with Scarlet and Violet. Scarlet and Violet are a symptom, not the beginning. The shift happened gradually, from adventures that tolerated uncertainty, to games that guided you far more aggressively, to routes with simpler navigation, to an open world that gave you more physical space without fully restoring the old sense of discovery. I don't want Pokemon to become brutally difficult. I don't need every cave to become a 1990s maze designed by a man who hates children. I don't want quality of life features thrown into the ocean because nostalgia demands its suffering. I want the series to remember that convenience is supposed to remove barriers between the player and the adventure, not remove the adventure itself. Fix the frame rate and all the bugs, improve the visuals, give the developers more time. But after all that, Pokemon still needs to answer the harder question. Does it trust me enough to play? If you want more videos like this, make sure to check out my other videos on modern gaming.